I think I've been teaching chord progressions wrong this entire time. If I take that same progression and just invert, I end up with something like this. I've always tried to get composers to think about writing linearly instead of blocked chords that kind of jump from one to the next and aren't connected in any way. There's even an entire section in my free ebook on composition dedicated to this very powerful way of thinking about putting chords together. That's down in the description below if you'd like to download it. But then I always demonstrate that by writing a series of blocked chords and then showing how you can make those blocked chords feel more linear through revoicing them, inverting them, redistributing all of the notes. But the more I've thought about it, that's not actually the way I write most of the time. Instead, I think I've boiled my process down to one question, and that's what's the smallest possible move that I can make in each part to have the biggest impact harmonically. So I actually start with the parts themselves and moving each part individually to see what kind of vertical color that produces. The linear informs the vertical. If I did a half step there, let's try that, and then I could put maybe a whole step here. We'll see. This is going to be tense. Ah, interesting. I rather like that, actually.
I like that.
Extreme tension here. And then with the whole step resolution, that was really interesting. So lots of possibilities here. But I think I've narrowed it down to essentially one thing that I'm trying to accomplish. And once you understand that, it makes the entire process a lot easier. It's really all about strategically avoiding doublings. Doubling, as referenced in this video, is simply having the same note in a chord more than once. And when you really get down to it, most of the rules of part writing that we learn in theory class, if you've studied traditional Western theory, were put in place to address doubling or avoiding doubling or figuring out how to get out of doubling in some way that maintains the independence of each part. And while my theory teachers taught me the rules, they never really taught me why those rules were in place. And it's really because things like parallel octaves are kind of like the part writing equivalent of phase cancellation. One part kind of steps behind the other and disappears momentarily. And if that's not our intent, we've essentially destroyed one of our voices. So all of these rules were put into place to avoid that happening. So I'm not going to sit here and say that I never double or that you should never double. I'm just going to provide you with an alternative that I like to go to as my default instead of defaulting to what my fingers want to do at the piano, which is find doublings, because I can often find much richer harmonic territory that I discover and find really beautiful simply by actively trying to escape doubling. Ah, interesting. So I really have two devices at my disposal. I start with stepwise motion, and if I can't get out of doubling with stepwise motion, chromaticism, half steps, and whole steps, I resort to larger intervals, which we will just blanketly call leaps. Blanketly? Okay. Sometimes I get so caught up trying to make these grand gestures. I guess that's a holdover from all the virtuosic piano music that I have learned over the decades, and I can easily forget the power of restraint. Well, there's nothing more restrained in part writing, other than not changing notes at all, I suppose, than stepwise motion. Small moves that can, if we use them strategically, have a big impact on the vertical harmony. One of my piano teachers used to say that all dynamics are relative. That means that you can make a loud seem louder by being quieter before the loud happens, so it's a greater contrast. This works really well in writing music too. The climax of Barber's Adagio for strings is so impactful, not only because of the building crescendo and the fact that we're getting higher and higher in register, but because of the intense build-up in tension that he ratchets up through all of this chromatic stepwise movement. By the time we build and build to the climax, that high B flat that the top voice, the top violins, or sopranos in the choral setting have, sounds like a high F. It sounds even higher. And because there is so much stepwise movement throughout all of the parts, and the melody in particular, when he does include a leap, it really jumps out. So whatever we do the most, whatever we establish as our baseline, in this case, Barber has established stepwise chromaticism, lots of stepwise motion. Whenever he breaks that tendency, or whenever we break that tendency with a leap, that becomes the thing that becomes like an accent. And this allows us to establish patterns and then break them strategically. And that's one of the most powerful tools that we have as composers, strategic contrast. And I dare to say that Barber would not have found these incredibly tasty harmonies and all of these incredible suspensions and resolutions and dissonances if he were dragging some chords, some block chords along in Cubase or Ableton or whatever. So how can we start to use these techniques for ourselves in a very simple way? Well, I kind of explored that in this video where I talked about a prompt where I would just move one voice at a time chromatically to see what kind of harmonies it would produce. And I'm just trying to find all of these points of tension and release. It's basically just a chain of suspensions. And simply doing that with a triad will take you to places that you would not explore otherwise. Some of these places you might not like, some of these places you may really enjoy. Interesting. Either way, you're exploring and you're choosing based on your taste. In a choral piece that I wrote about 13 years ago now, I was obviously very influenced by Barber, and I wanted to explore a similar kind of harmonic movement. These tiny moves that would make a big change on the harmony. In the opening section of this piece, I start on a big fat G-flat major triad, and then I end up in this sort of A minor territory by the end of that section. And to our functional theory brains, that doesn't make a lot of sense. But what makes it work is not where I start and where I end up, it's how I get there. Notice how tiny the changes, the chord changes are between this first phrase and the second. I'm trying to find the smallest moves possible that will create the freshest harmonic changes in the next phrase or in the next chord. So I'm thinking about more key areas than key signatures in this case. I'm exploring chromaticism, that simple half-step movement. I start with half steps. If I can't get to a place that I like with half steps, I move on to whole steps. If I can't find a place that I like, or I'm doubling too much with whole steps and half steps, I try larger leaps. And that's sort of the hierarchy of thinking as I explore using all of this linear stepwise movement. I'm essentially just exploring that question that I asked at the beginning of this video. What's the smallest change I can make that will have the biggest impact on the harmony? Now, another thing you might notice here that I learned from Barber and from all of the Bach chorales that I've played over the years is that when one part holds, the other parts can move and vice versa, and this creates more of a sense of independence between those voices. This is very prevalent in choral music. It really just creates all of these anchor points where we can have this tension and release, suspension and resolution that is incredibly effective. If you'd like to see more of my favorite compositional techniques and concepts that have helped me the most through the years, you can find my free composition ebook in the description below or in the pinned comment. So I see a lot of producers who are trying to jump straight into microtonality before they've fully explored the 12 notes of the chromatic scale and all of the ways that we can use them. And there's still a lot of incredible music in those 12 notes. If you'd like to see even more specific techniques that I use to make my own music and chord progressions less predictable, you need to watch this video right here where I go into more detail on that.